Now, I'd like to also, though, on a serious note, make mention of a community effort in Vermont to house homeless veterans I thought you might find interesting. It's the Upper Valley Haven and White River Junction. They're going to open a new 20-bed adult shelter this spring. What had happened, there were homeless veterans that would come to the VA hospital, which is nearby, to get care, but had no place to live, and half of the people at this shelter will be veterans. And Secretary Donovan, I mention this too because your department is supporting the project through special purpose funds in your 2009 budget, and Secretary Shinseki, the local VA hospital staff, I'd compliment them. They've been extraordinarily helpful in this. Now, what my question to Secretary Shinseki would be, hear your thoughts on the VA's process for allocating HUD-VASH vouchers. The first two rounds of awards, Vermont was allocated 55 vouchers. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Vermont State Housing Authority was invited to apply for 15 this new round. We've been very successful in utilizing this program. I'm just curious why the tremendous cut down to only just over a dozen of them?
Senator, let me defer to Secretary Donovan on this. The allocation is conducted by HUD. We do collaborate on this, for example, where we think more attention needs to be paid to the more rural areas. We are in dialogue, but ultimately the decision is a HUD decision.
Senator, thank you for your question. I would just say the example that you cited, Vermont has been very creative, its housing community there, in finding ways, not just with HUD-VASH, but in other ways to serve homeless veterans. To be clear on the allocations, in 2008 there were 20 HUD-VASH vouchers allocated to Vermont. In 2009 there were 35. That's where the total 55 that you cited comes from, and the 2010 allocation was 15, so it is slightly lower than the 2008 allocation and significantly lower than the one last year.
Trust me, we could use more.
What we do each year is to look at our data on need, the number of homeless veterans in various geographies, and we did determine this year, perhaps in part because of your effectiveness in using other tools as well to get veterans off the street, that a lower allocation was warranted. I'd be happy to follow up with your team on more details on that need.
If you could also, the VA has been willing to allow VASH vouchers to be used for project-based rentals. Vermont State Housing Authority asked the VA office in Boston last November if it can use project-based rentals, but it hasn't received a response yet. I know from Montpelier to Boston is almost 200 miles, but between November and May, if you might mention to the General that a response would be nice.
I will look into it and I'll get you a response.
Because we'd like, I'm sure you will, but I mean, because we'd like to look at this project rental as a possibility. And of course, we have the lease up PASH program. I think it's where we could work with others on this. And I think lastly, the VA could make a very strong statement in their homeless program by moving into a housing first model. And I think it could be done. I'm not going to ask specific questions on it, but if both of you, if your staffs could work with mine on this, again, there are areas that I see as being especially helpful in rural areas, non-centralized areas, and areas like our state is mostly rural, but every other state that's represented here has rural areas on it. We have not quite the population of South Dakota, but you're about 8 times larger, so if I worry about our rural areas, I can imagine what yours are like. So,
may I respond?
Sure.
Senator, regarding Housing First, I'll credit our dialogue between Secretary Donovan and myself. Frankly, I had no background, much of a background in this area, wasn't familiar with Housing First. Based on our discussions, I am convinced it's a good way to go. And so we're beginning to relook our policies regarding Housing First versus anything else we have there. And I think I'm comfortable that this will come out to a good conclusion. Happy to follow up with your staff as well.
Music to my ears, thank you.
Okay, and on the rural issues, we have been in dialogue, both Secretary Donovan and myself, on paying attention to the rural areas. And I think what I can tell you is in grant per diem programs, 14% of our total funding has been dedicated to the rural areas specifically. We do, with the support of this committee, have an opportunity to run a prevention pilot, both VA and DOD collaborating. It's a 3-year multi-site pilot. HUD will select the sites. It targets rural communities. VA has the normal responsibility of coming up with case management. We think it'll begin in the 4th quarter of this year, and we think maybe we'll get as many as 210 veterans and families in the current year, this year, and then look for about 840 veterans and families in 2011. So we are paying attention to the rural aspects of the challenge.
Thank you very much, thank you.
Thank you.
If I could just add very briefly, we are also implementing, thanks to your work on the Hearth Act, the first ever comprehensive rural homelessness program, and that will be introduced this year for the first time, given the differences and the challenges. And also, I think, Senator Leahy, you may have been had to be away from the hearing for a moment when I mentioned earlier that we are planning to implement for the first time ever, a project-based HUD-VASH voucher pilot with 400 vouchers this year. Will be competitive because we do recognize that the project-based types of examples that you're talking about have been quite effective in certain places.
Thank you.